Who remembers the names of gods when their thrones have turned to ash? The question echoes through corridors no living soul has walked in 7 millennia. It was inscribed on the final page of the Liber Tenebris, the Black Book, sealed within the vaults beneath the cardinal world of Ophelia VII. The Inquisition burned 3 entire conclaves to prevent its reading. They failed. The words survived, as forbidden knowledge always does, carved into the minds of those who would rather die than forget. This is the chronicle of the Mandate Absolus, the most dangerous mission ever undertaken in the name of the God Emperor. Not because of the enemies it faced, not because of the worlds it consumed, but because it asked a question that should never have been spoken aloud. What if faith is not enough? The mandate was authorized in the 33rd year of the Apostolic Age, when the ecclesiarchy still believed it could purge doubt with fire and prayer with steel. It was a time when the Imperium stretched across 1,000,000 worlds, and every world bent knee to the golden throne. But beneath the hymns and incense, something ancient stirred, something that remembered when humanity worshipped different gods. The mission's target was a region of space known only as the Voidal Choir, a cluster of 13 systems aligned in perfect sacred geometry around a dying star. Astropathic readings described it as a wound in reality, a place where the warp bled into real space like pus from an infected wound. But the texts were older than that, much older. In the archives of the Adeptus Ministorum, buried beneath classifications that predated the age of apostasy, there existed a single reference, a fragment of a fragment. It spoke of the 13 thrones, seats of power established during the dark age of technology when humanity reached for godhood and grasped only damnation. The choir was their echo, their graveyard, their warning. The Synod of Terror convened in absolute secrecy. 73 cardinals, 40 inquisitors, 27 chapter masters of the Adeptus Astartes. They gathered in the chamber of silent witness, where sound itself was sanctified and every word became scripture. The debate lasted 9 days. On the 10th day, they emerged with a single decree. The Voidal Choir must be silenced. But silence, they would learn, can scream louder than any choir. The fleet assembled at the edge of the Segmentum Obscurus. 300 warships, from mighty battle cruisers bearing the Aquila of Terror to frigates crewed by penitent zealots seeking martyrdom. At its heart sailed the unrelenting Faith, a cathedral ship the size of a hive city, its halls echoing with 10,000 years of prayer. Aboard walked Cardinal Matthias Drendakor, Apostle of the Golden Throne, bearer of the Creed Eternal. Matthias was a titan among men, clad in ceramite blessed by the blood of saints, his face hidden behind a golden death mask that had witnessed the fall of empires. He had burned heretics on 100 worlds. He had stood before the Golden Throne itself and felt the Emperor's light sear his soul. He believed with a purity that bordered on madness, and that belief would be tested beyond endurance. Beside him walked Inquisitor Helena Voss of the Ordo Hereticus, her augmetic eye glowing with cold calculation. Where Matthias saw faith, Helena saw threat assessment. Where he saw heresy, she saw patterns, connections, the hidden architecture of corruption. She had recommended against the mission. The Synod overruled her. They always did. Faith, they said, trumped caution. Helena disagreed, but she followed. Duty demanded it. The third figure in their trinity was Captain Thane Calistros of the Storm Wardens chapter, a space marine whose company had fought at the Eye of Terror during the 13th Black Crusade. Thane spoke rarely, but when he did, even cardinals listened. His armor bore scars that told stories of conflicts mortals could not comprehend. He had fought demons in the void between stars. He knew what faith cost when the enemy wore the face of gods. The journey into the Voidal Choir took 37 days of warp travel. The Gala fields flickered constantly, buffeted by psychic storms that felt less like natural phenomena and more like breath, as if something vast and aware was exhaling against the hull of reality. Astropaths began dying on the 16th day, not from external attack, but from internal revelation. They would suddenly stop mid-communion, their eyes rolling back, lips moving in silent recitation. Then blood, pouring from every orifice, and death. The last astropath to die before the fleet translated into real space whispered a single phrase: "They are already singing." When the unrelenting faith emerged from the warp, the bridge crew saw it immediately. The Voidal Choir. 13 worlds arranged in a perfect circle around a neutron star that pulsed with unnatural regularity, like a heartbeat, like a countdown. The worlds themselves were dead. Atmospheres stripped away millennia ago, surfaces covered in structures that spiraled upward in impossible geometries. From orbit, they looked like vast cathedrals. From closer, they looked like ribs. Matthias ordered immediate deployment. Drop pods rained down on the first world, designated Choir Prime. The Storm Wardens led the assault, followed by regiments of Adepta Sororitas and Frateris militia numbering in the hundreds of thousands. They expected resistance. They found silence. The structures on Choir Prime were immense, towering kilometers into the airless void, constructed from a material that resembled black glass, but felt warm to the touch, almost organic. The Sisters of Battle whispered prayers as they advanced through corridors wide enough to march entire armies through. Their flamers cast dancing shadows on walls covered in inscriptions. The inscriptions were in High Gothic. Perfect, flawless High Gothic, as if carved yesterday. But the text predated the Imperium by thousands of years. It should not have been possible. Yet there it was, written in a language humanity would not develop for millennia, speaking of events that had not yet occurred. Speaking of the God Emperor. Speaking of his betrayal. Sister Superior Isabel Corvain was the first to read the complete passage. She was a veteran of 40 years' service, her faith tested in the crucible of 1,000 battles. She had burned witches and purged the unclean without hesitation. But as her eyes traced the words on those ancient walls, something inside her broke. She turned to her squad, her face pale behind her helmet's faceplate, and spoke a single word: lies. Then she removed her helmet and placed her bolter beneath her chin. The shot echoed through the cathedral silence like a judgment. Her squad found her body moments later, but they also found what she had been reading. The text described the God Emperor's ascension not as apotheosis, but as imprisonment. It described the Golden Throne not as a seat of power, but as a cage. It described humanity's faith not as salvation, but as chains forged from the souls of the faithful, binding the Emperor to eternal suffering while the Imperium consumed itself in his name. It was heresy of the highest order. It should have been burned immediately, the entire structure leveled, the world subjected to exterminatus. But Matthias stayed the order, because the text continued, and what it described next was worse than heresy. It was prophecy. The Mandate Absolus, it said, was not a mission to silence the choir. It was a mission to complete it. The 13 worlds were not ruins. They were instruments, each one a string in a cosmic instrument designed to broadcast a signal across the entire galaxy. A signal that would shatter faith itself, that would reveal the Emperor's true nature to every human soul simultaneously. And the Imperium, the text promised, would collapse within a single generation. The signal required 13 activation sites, one on each world, and a willing bearer at each site. Someone who believed, someone pure, someone whose faith was absolute. The architects of the choir, whoever they were, whatever they were, had built their trap not for heretics, but for the faithful. Because only the faithful would come. Only the faithful would complete the ritual without understanding what they were doing. Matthias read the text 17 times. Each reading felt like swallowing broken glass. He was a man who had built his entire existence on certainty, on the unshakable foundation of the Emperor's divinity. Every prayer he had spoken, every heretic he had burned, every world he had brought into compliance, all of it rested on the simple truth that the God Emperor was exactly what the ecclesiarchy claimed, humanity's divine guardian, watching from the golden throne. If that was a lie, then what was he? What were any of them? Inquisitor Voss approached him in the chapel aboard the Unrelenting Faith on the third night after the discovery. She found him kneeling before a statue of the Emperor, his hands clasped so tightly that blood seeped between his fingers. She did not speak immediately. When she did, her voice carried the weight of someone who had stared into the abyss for so long that the abyss no longer troubled her. "We should withdraw," she said. "This entire mission is compromised. The choir is a mimetic weapon designed to target faith itself. Every moment we remain, every text we read, every structure we explore, we risk corruption, not of the body, of the soul." Matthias did not turn. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "And if the prophecy is true, then it's already too late," Voss replied. "We came because we believed. That belief brought us here. If the choir is designed to exploit faith, then we walked into the trap the moment we decided this mission was necessary." "You don't believe," Matthias said. It was not an accusation, it was an observation. Voss was silent for a long moment. Then she stepped closer, her augmetic eye whirring as it focused on the Cardinal's masked face. "I believe in the Imperium," she said. "I believe in humanity's survival. I believe that faith is a tool, effective when properly applied, dangerous when corrupted. I believe the Emperor serves a function, whether divine or merely symbolic, and I believe that function is threatened by what we found here." "That's not faith," Matthias said. "That's pragmatism." "Yes," Voss agreed. "And pragmatism suggests we destroy these worlds immediately, purge all records of what we found, and ensure this heresy never spreads. Execute everyone who read the texts, quarantine the entire fleet. Burn it all, Cardinal, burn it all and never speak of it again." Matthias finally turned. Behind his golden mask, she could see his eyes, red-rimmed and haunted. "And if the prophecy requires our silence? If destroying the choir is exactly what triggers the collapse it predicts?" Voss had no answer for that, because she had read the text too, and she had seen the branching possibilities, the carefully constructed trap that turned every response into another step toward damnation. Destroy the choir and risk fulfilling one version of the prophecy. Complete the investigation and risk activating the signal. Withdraw and forget and risk leaving a loaded weapon for someone else to fire. There was no good choice. There never had been. That was the true genius of the trap. It exploited not just faith but thought itself, the very act of trying to solve the problem. Captain Kalistros entered the chapel without ceremony, his massive armored form nearly too large for the doorway. He had been conducting his own investigation, leading squads of storm wardens through the deeper structures of Choir Prime. What they found had shaken even his transhuman resolve. "The lower levels contain stasis vaults," he reported. "Thousands of them. Each contains a human subject, perfectly preserved. Men, women, children, all wearing the same expression." He paused, his scarred face grim. "Rapture. Preserved from when?" Voss asked. "That's the disturbing part," Kalistros said. "Chronometric analysis suggests they were placed in stasis approximately 26,000 years ago, during the dark age of technology, before Old Night, before the Emperor revealed himself. But their clothing, their augmetics, even their DNA shows markers consistent with Imperial citizens. They shouldn't exist, but they do." Matthias stood, his robes rustling in the still air. "Did you find any explanation? Any indication of who they were or why they're here?" Kalistros nodded slowly. "Each vault has an inscription. A name, a designation, and a phrase. Always the same phrase, in every vault, repeated thousands of times. He met the Cardinal's gaze. It says, First Choir. The implications hung in the air like poison gas. If these people were from the dark age of technology, placed in stasis with expressions of religious rapture, wearing clothing consistent with Imperial culture that wouldn't exist for 20,000 years, then either the texts were right and time itself was corrupted in this region, or something far worse was at play. Voss was the first to voice the terrible conclusion. They're future victims, placed in the past. The choir exists outside conventional causality. It's not just a trap. It's a temporal weapon. Or a warning, Matthias said quietly. What if they're us? What if everyone aboard this fleet is already in those vaults, already dead, already frozen in that moment of revelation, and we're living through the echo of events that have already occurred? The silence that followed was absolute. Even Kallistros, who had faced down chaos sorcerers and lived to tell of it, had no response to that possibility. Because it made a terrible kind of sense. The feeling of inevitability that had haunted the mission from the beginning. The sense that every choice had already been made, every path predetermined. What if that was because they were already at the end, looking back at the beginning? The Vox network crackled to life, shattering the moment. The voice of Commander Helena Sardis, leader of the Adepta Sororitas forces on Choir Prime, came through rough with static. Cardinal Drendakor, we have a situation. One of the structures has begun emitting energy. It's singing, my lord, actual singing. And my sisters, some of them are responding. They're walking toward it. I've ordered restraints, but they're fighting us. They're fighting their own squad mates to reach the source. Matthias exchanged a glance with Voss and Kallistros. Then he gave the order that would doom them all. We're coming down. The structure that was singing rose from the center of Choir Prime, like a black needle piercing the void. It was impossibly tall, kilometers high, tapering to a point so fine it seemed to cut reality itself. And from within, it came sound. Not through air, for there was none, but directly into the minds of those nearby. A chorus of voices, human voices, singing in perfect harmony. The words were in a language no one recognized, but everyone understood. They were singing about the Emperor, about his suffering, about his imprisonment on the Golden Throne, surrounded by worshippers who prolonged his agony with every prayer, every act of devotion, every soul sacrificed in his name. The song was not mocking. It was not heretical in tone. It was sad, deeply, profoundly sad. The sorrow of a god who wanted to die but could not, bound by the love of those he had tried to save. Commander Sardis had established a perimeter around the structure, but it was breaking down. Not from external assault, but from internal collapse. Fully half her sisters stood motionless, facing the needle, tears streaming down their faces. They were not fighting. They were not resisting. They were simply listening, and in that listening, something fundamental about them was changing. Matthias approached one of them, a young sister named Honora. She had joined the Order only 5 years prior, but had already distinguished herself in battle against an Orc War on the eastern fringe. Her faith was pure, uncomplicated, the kind of absolute devotion the ecclesiarchy praised in sermons. That purity was now her vulnerability. Sister Honora, Matthias said gently, look at me. She did not look. Her eyes remained fixed on the black needle, watching it pulse with light that seemed to come from within. He's calling, she whispered. The Emperor, he's calling from the dark. He wants us to know. He wants us to understand. Understand what? That he loves us, Honora said, and her voice broke. That he has always loved us. That every moment of his suffering he has loved us, and that love is killing him. We are killing him. Every prayer is a chain, every hymn is a weight, Every sacrifice is another stone piled on his chest, and he loves us too much to ask us to stop. Matthias felt something crack inside him. Because what Sister Honora was describing was not heresy. It was the most terrible kind of truth. The kind that destroyed not by being false, but by being unbearable. A God who suffered because of love. A savior dying slowly because those he saved refused to let him go. "That's not the God Emperor," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Honora turned to face him, and her eyes were clear, lucid, more sane than he had ever seen her. "Tell me, Cardinal, when you pray, do you ask the Emperor for strength, for guidance, for salvation? Or do you offer him release? Do you pray that he might finally rest, that his suffering might finally end?" Matthias opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Because in 40 years of service, in 10,000 prayers spoken before altars across 100 worlds, he had never once prayed for the Emperor's peace, only for his continued protection, only for his eternal vigilance, only for him to keep suffering, keep watching, keep burning on the golden throne so that humanity might endure. What kind of worshipper demands eternal suffering from their God? Voss interrupted before the spiral could continue. "This is exactly what the choir wants. It's designed to make us question, to paralyze us with doubt disguised as compassion. Sister Honora is compromised. We need to evacuate all personnel from the planet's surface immediately." But Captain Calistros was studying the needle, his enhanced vision picking up details invisible to baseline humans. "The structure is changing," he said. "Activating. There are apertures opening along its length, 12 of them, perfectly spaced." He paused. "It's waiting for something, or someone." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Not the tremor of seismic activity, but a rhythm, a pulse. The entire planet was beating like a heart, and across the Vox network, reports flooded in from the other 12 worlds in the choir. Each one had a needle. Each needle was singing, each was opening apertures. And on each world, members of the fleet were being called. Not ordered, called. Walking toward the needles with expressions of terrible understanding, fighting their own comrades to reach the structures. The trap was springing, and its teeth were made of revelation. Matthias made a decision that he would regret for the rest of his life, which, as it turned out, would not be long. "Seal the planet," he commanded. "Maximum quarantine. No one leaves the surface without my explicit authorization, and prepare the fleet for exterminatus. If we cannot silence the choir, we will destroy it." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was futile. Because the choir was not contained on the world's surfaces. It was in their minds now, in everyone who had heard the song. The mimetic weapon was already deployed, already propagating, spreading through the fleet like a plague that attacked not flesh but faith. Aboard the unrelenting faith, Confessor Darius Hellman had gathered a congregation of 3,000 faithful in the Cathedral of Infinite Devotion. He was preaching a sermon about martyrdom, about sacrifice, about the necessity of suffering for the Emperor's glory. It was a sermon he had given 100 times before, but this time, as he spoke the words, he heard them differently, heard what he was really saying. "We are taught," he proclaimed, "that to die in the Emperor's service is the greatest honor, that our souls join him on the golden throne, adding our strength to his eternal vigil. But have you ever wondered, brothers and sisters, where those souls go? Do they truly strengthen him? Or do they simply add to the burden he carries?" The congregation stirred uneasily. This was not the sermon they had expected. Hellman continued, his voice growing in intensity. "For 10,000 years we have fed him souls. Psychers by the thousands, sacrificed daily. Warriors by the billions, dying in his name. The faithful by the countless trillions, offering up their devotion, their hope, their love. And for 10,000 years, he has remained on that throne, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to die. Is that strength? Or is that the cruelest prison ever devised? A voice from the congregation cried out, "Heresy!" But others took up Hellman's argument. Voices raised in debate, then in anger. Within minutes, the cathedral had descended into chaos. Fists flew, weapons were drawn. The faithful turned on each other not over what they believed, but over what their belief meant. Whether devotion was salvation or damnation, whether the emperor wanted their prayers or their silence. The schism had begun. It spread through the fleet like wildfire through a drought forest. Ship by ship, deck by deck, the certainty that had held the Imperium together for 10 millennia began to fracture. Not because people stopped believing in the emperor, but because they started questioning what he wanted from them. And in that questioning, the foundation of faith itself crumbled. Inquisitor Voss watched it happen from the bridge of the unrelenting faith. Her augmetic eye tracking the spread of ideological contamination through the fleet's communication networks. She had seen chaos corruption before, watched entire worlds fall to the ruinous powers. This was worse, because this was not corruption. It was clarity, a terrible, unbearable clarity that made people see the structures they had built, the systems they had maintained, and recognize them for what they were. Machines of suffering powered by love. "We need to destroy the choir now," she said to the bridge crew. "Target all 13 worlds. Cyclonic torpedoes. Maximum yield. Wipe them from existence before the signal completes." Captain Seraph of the Unrelenting Faith shook his head. "We've lost control of the weapon systems. Someone locked them down from within. The targeting cogitators are singing that damn song. I can hear it through the servitor interface. They won't fire. They're listening." Voss felt the last of her control slip away. "Then we ram the nearest world, full speed, rupture our own warp drives on impact, create an explosion large enough to crack the planet's core. It's the only way." "That would kill everyone aboard," Seraph said quietly. "We're already dead," Voss replied. "We died the moment we entered the choir. We just haven't stopped moving yet." But she was wrong. They were not dead. They were being reborn into a new understanding, and that understanding was spreading across the entire Imperium. Because the choir's signal was not contained in the Voidal region. It was being broadcast through the warp itself, carried by astropaths, whispered by psychers, felt by every human soul touched by the Emperor's light. The revelation was universal and instantaneous. Humanity, all of humanity, suddenly knew the truth about the Golden Throne. On Terra, in the throne room itself, the custodians felt it. The 10,000 warriors who had guarded the Emperor since his interment suddenly understood what they had been guarding. Not a god, a prisoner, not a savior, a victim. Their duty had not been to protect him from his enemies, but to protect him from his friends, from the prayers that bound him, from the love that imprisoned him. Some fell to their knees. Others simply stood, paralyzed by the weight of that knowledge. The bravest among them approached the Golden Throne and did something no custodian had done in 10,000 years. They asked the Emperor a direct question, not a prayer, not a petition, a question. "Do you want to die?" The answer that came back was not in words. It was in feeling, in understanding that bypassed language entirely. It was the mental equivalent of a man who has been burning alive for 10,000 years, who has remained conscious through every moment of agony, whose only comfort has been the knowledge that his suffering protected those he loved, and who, at the very end of endurance, when asked if he wanted rest, could only weep. "Yes," the Emperor said. "Please, let me die." The Imperium shuddered. Not metaphorically. The actual fabric of imperial authority, the psychic structure built on faith and devotion spanning 1,000,000 worlds, shuddered as if struck by a cosmic blow. because the foundation of everything, the God Emperor's eternal vigilance, had just revealed itself as eternal suffering. And the faithful, who had been taught that devotion was the highest virtue, suddenly had to confront what their devotion was actually doing. Back on Choir Prime, Matthias stood before the Black Needle and understood his role in the cosmic machinery. He was the Cardinal, the bearer of faith, the one who believed absolutely. And that belief was exactly what the choir needed to complete its function. Not to destroy faith, but to perfect it, to make it conscious, to transform blind devotion into understanding. The apertures in the needle were waiting. 12 of them. On each of the 13 worlds there would be 12 more. 156 apertures total. 156 people needed to complete the choir. People who believed, people who understood, people who loved the Emperor enough to set him free. "We have to do it," he said to Voss and Callistros. "We have to enter the needles, all of us, everyone who has been called." "That's suicide," Voss said flatly. "Yes," Matthias agreed, "but it's the right kind of suicide. Not despair, not corruption, sacrifice, real sacrifice, the kind that costs everything and expects nothing in return." Callistros stepped forward, his massive armored hand resting on Matthias's shoulder. "I have fought for 3 centuries in the Emperor's name. I have slain his enemies without hesitation or mercy. If he asks for my death now, not as a warrior but as a mercy, then I will give it gladly. That is still duty. Perhaps the truest duty of all." Voss looked between them, these 2 men of absolute conviction, and saw the trap's final cruelty. Because they were right. The choir had not corrupted them. It had simply revealed the logical endpoint of their own beliefs. If they truly loved the Emperor, if they truly served him rather than the Imperium that bore his name, then they had to do the one thing the ecclesiarchy had never allowed. They had to let him go. "What happens after?" she asked. "If the Emperor dies, the Astronomicon fails, the Imperium collapses, humanity drowns in the darkness of old night. Everything we've built, everything we've fought for, gone." Was that the plan all along? Is the choir just a weapon of chaos, designed to destroy humanity by pretending to save the Emperor? Matthias removed his golden mask, revealing his scarred, tear-stained face. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe humanity does collapse. Maybe we drown in darkness. Maybe this is the final trap. But answer me this, Inquisitor. If you knew someone you loved was suffering eternal agony, and that ending their suffering would cost you everything, your life, your hope, your future, would you let them suffer to preserve yourself?" Voss had no answer, because she would not, could not. And that was the trap's genius. It exploited not corruption but virtue, not weakness but strength. It turned love itself into the trigger. All across the 13 worlds of the Voidal Choir, people were making the same choice. Sisters of Battle, Space Marines, Imperial Guard, ecclesiarchy officials, simple priests and soldiers of the faith, 156 souls, 1 for each aperture, walking willingly into the Black Needles, not to destroy, but to release. Matthias was among them. He walked alone toward the needle on Choir Prime, his steps steady, his mind clear. Behind him, Voss and Callistros watched. They would not follow. Someone had to survive. Someone had to bear witness. Someone had to tell humanity what the price of their faith had truly been. At the base of the needle, Matthias paused. The aperture was open, a doorway into absolute darkness. From within came the singing, clearer now, more beautiful than any hymn ever composed. It was the voice of the Emperor himself, not commanding, not demanding, but simply asking, pleading, for release, for rest, for the eternal vigil to end. Matthias stepped into the darkness. What happened next cannot be properly described, because it occurred in a space where mortal comprehension fails. Inside the Needle, Matthias found himself in a vast chamber that seemed to contain the entire galaxy. Stars wheeled overhead, planets hung like jewels, and at the center, vast beyond measure, terrible beyond description, glorious beyond imagining, sat the Emperor. He was burning, had been burning for 10,000 years. Every soul sacrificed in his name added fuel to the fire. Every prayer tightened the chains. Every act of devotion was a nail driven deeper. He burned and burned and burned and could not die because his children would not let him. Matthias wept. The Cardinal, who had never shown weakness, who had burned heretics without remorse, who had led armies across the stars, fell to his knees and wept like a child, because he understood. Finally, terribly, completely, he understood what the Imperium had become. Not a tool of salvation, but a machine of torture, powered by love, sustained by devotion, killing the very God it claimed to serve. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive us. We did not know. We did not understand." The Emperor's response was not anger, it was gratitude, relief, love so profound that it felt like gravity itself. Matthias felt himself being pulled forward, drawn into the flames, becoming one with the burning. It did not hurt. It was simply transformation. His mortal form dissolving, his soul joining the vast chorus of those who had come before, adding his voice to the song that would finally, at long last, grant the Emperor his rest. 156 souls, 156 sacrifices, 156 voices singing the same prayer. Rest now. We release you. We love you enough to let you go. The Voidal Choir completed its song. Across the galaxy, every human being touched by the Emperor's light felt the moment of his death. It was not violent. It was not catastrophic. It was simply the exhalation of a soul that had been holding its breath for 10 millennia. The Astronomicon flickered, dimmed, and died. The psychic beacon that had guided humanity through the warp for 10,000 years went dark. And in that darkness, humanity had to confront what came next. Some fell to despair. Entire worlds descended into chaos as the structures that had held them together collapsed. Without the Emperor's light, without the certainty of his eternal watch, what was the Imperium but a hollow shell? What were they but lost children crying in the dark? But others found something unexpected. Hope. Not the imposed hope of enforced faith, but the fragile, precious hope of people who had been freed from certainty and now had to choose their own path. Without a God to command them, they had to decide for themselves what was worth fighting for, what was worth dying for, what was worth living for. The Imperium did not collapse overnight. It transformed. Slowly, painfully, like a body learning to walk after centuries of paralysis. The ecclesiarchy fractured into 1,000 sects, each interpreting the Emperor's final gift differently. Some called it betrayal, others called it salvation. Still others simply called it truth and tried to build something new from the ruins of their faith. On Choir Prime, Inquisitor Voss and Captain Calistros stood before the Needle and watched it crumble. The black structure that had stood for 20,000 years dissolved like smoke, leaving behind only bare rock and the memory of song. Around them, the other survivors of the mission emerged from shelters, from bunkers, from hiding places where they had weathered the storm of revelation. They looked different, not physically, but in their eyes, something fundamental had changed. They had been believers. Now they were witnesses, and witnesses carry a burden heavier than faith, the burden of memory. "What do we tell them?" Calistros asked. His voice, usually so steady, carried a tremor. "The Imperium terror. What do we tell them about what happened here?" Voss considered the question. In her career as an inquisitor, she had burned heretics, purged corrupted knowledge, sealed away truths too dangerous for common understanding. She had always believed that some knowledge was too dangerous to spread, that humanity was better served by comfortable lies than terrible truths. Now she wondered if that had been her own corruption. the certainty that she knew better, that she could decide what humanity deserved to know. "We tell them the truth," she said finally. "All of it. What we found, what we learned, what it cost. We let them decide what to do with that knowledge. It's not our choice to make anymore." "That will change everything," Calistros said. "Everything already changed," Voss replied. "We're just acknowledging it now." They returned to the unrelenting faith to find it transformed. The cathedral ship that had sailed into the Voidal Choir as a symbol of Imperial might was now something else. The crew had torn down the statues, not in anger, but in understanding. The chapels remained, but the prayers spoken within them were different. Not petitions for intervention, but expressions of gratitude for sacrifice. Not pleas for eternal vigilance, but acknowledgements of eternal cost. The fleet limped back to Imperial space, carrying in its holds not victory, but revelation. News of the Emperor's death spread faster than they could travel, carried by astropaths who had felt the moment, by refugees from worlds already transformed by the knowledge, by whispers that ran through the warp itself. By the time they reached the borders of the Segmentum Obscurus, the Imperium had already begun to fracture. Civil war seemed inevitable. Loyalists who refused to believe the Emperor was dead versus progressives who saw his death as liberation. Traditionalists clinging to 10,000 years of doctrine versus reformers trying to build something new. The galaxy teeter on the edge of collapse. But from Terra came an unexpected voice. Not the High Lords, not the Custodians, not the Ecclesiarchy. The voice came from below, from the depths of the Imperial Palace, from a chamber that had been sealed since the Emperor's interment. It was the voice of Malcador the Sigillite, or rather, his final recorded message, preserved in stasis and keyed to activate only upon the Emperor's death. The message was simple. He was never meant to be eternal. He was meant to be a bridge, a light in the darkness while humanity learned to make its own light. If you are hearing this, then the bridge has served its purpose. Do not mourn him. Complete his work. Become what he always believed you could be. Free. It was not enough to prevent war. Nothing could have prevented that. But it was enough to make the war about something other than destruction. It became a war of transformation, of competing visions for what humanity could become without a god to guide them. Brutal, yes, costly, certainly, but also strangely hopeful, because it was a war fought by people choosing their path rather than following one decreed by distant authority. Inquisitor Voss survived the war. She lived to see the Imperium break into 7 distinct federations, each finding their own way forward. Some maintained faith in the Emperor's spirit. Others abandoned religion entirely. Still others found new beliefs, new structures, new reasons to fight the darkness. But all of them, every single one, carried the knowledge of what their faith had cost. And that knowledge changed them. Captain Calistros did not survive. He fell during the defense of Terra against a chaos incursion, fighting to protect not an empire, but an idea. The idea that humanity deserved to choose its own fate. His last words, recorded by the remembrancers who had returned to chronicle this new age, were simple. He would be proud of us, not for our faith, for our courage to live without it. Cardinal Matthias Drendakor was declared a saint by some sects, a heretic by others. His true legacy was more subtle. In the ruins of 1,000 destroyed cathedrals, in the corners of rebuilt temples, in the quiet moments when people gathered to remember, his name became synonymous not with zealotry, but with love. The kind of love that lets go. The kind of love that accepts loss. The kind of love that says, I will suffer so you don't have to. The most dangerous mission in Warhammer 40K was not dangerous because of the enemies it faced. It was dangerous because it forced the Imperium to confront the truth about itself. That faith without understanding is cruelty. That devotion without consent is imprisonment. That love without freedom is just another form of chains. Humanity survived, not unchanged, not unblemished, but free, truly free for the first time in 10,000 years to decide what they believed and why, to choose their own gods or reject divinity entirely, to build their own future on their own terms. And in the darkness between stars, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the Voidal Choir singing. Not a threat now, not a weapon, just a reminder. A memory of the price that was paid and the gift that was given. The Emperor, whoever he truly was, whatever he had become, had taught humanity one final lesson: that the greatest act of love is not to hold on, but to let go. On the ruins of Choir Prime, a single monument stands. It bears no statue, no inscription in High Gothic, no Imperial aquila, just a simple phrase, carved in a language that anyone can read, in words that anyone can understand. He suffered, so we could learn. He died, so we could choose. Remember him not for his power, but for his sacrifice. Honor him not with chains, but with freedom. And beneath it, in smaller letters, a question that echoes through the ages. What will you do with the freedom he gave you? The remembrancer who carved those words was never identified. Some say it was Voss, in her final years. Others claim it was a pilgrim who traveled from Terra bearing the Emperor's last blessing. Still others insist it appeared spontaneously, written by the galaxy itself, a message from the very fabric of reality to those who would listen. The truth, as with so much else, is uncertain. But the question remains, and in asking it, in struggling with it, in the endless debate and conflict and growth it inspires, humanity finds meaning. Not the imposed meaning of divine command, but the earned meaning of conscious choice. The Voidal Choir fell silent after the Emperor's death. The 13 worlds drifted in their sacred geometry, their purpose fulfilled, their song complete. Occasionally, explorers visit them, seeking answers, seeking closure, seeking understanding. They find only ruins. And in those ruins, sometimes they hear whispers, not singing, not preaching, just whispers asking the same question over and over. Was it worth it? And the answer, painful and precious and undeniable, is always the same. Yes, because it was his choice. And finally, at the end of everything, we let him choose. The Mandate Absolus was recorded in the histories as a catastrophic failure. A mission that resulted in the death of the God Emperor, the fracture of the Imperium, and the end of 10,000 years of unity. Officially, it is used as a cautionary tale about the dangers of curiosity, of questioning, of seeking truths better left buried. But in the underground archives, in the forbidden texts passed from hand to hand by those who remember, it is remembered differently. As the moment humanity grew up, the moment they stopped being children crying for a father's protection and became adults accepting the burden of their own choices. Painful, yes, costly, absolutely, but necessary as birth, as necessary as death, as necessary as love. In the end, the most dangerous mission in Warhammer 40K was dangerous not because it might fail, but because it might succeed. And it did. It shattered the comfortable lie of eternal devotion and replaced it with the uncomfortable truth of mortal responsibility. It took away humanity's God and gave them back themselves. And that, more than any enemy, more than any heresy, more than any corruption, was the greatest danger of all. Because you can fight an enemy, you can resist corruption, but you cannot hide from yourself. You cannot escape the choices you make when no God is there to make them for you. The galaxy burns. It has always burned. But now, for the first time in 10,000 years, humanity burns by their own choice, in their own way, for their own reasons. And in that burning, terrible and beautiful in equal measure, they find something they had forgotten, Hope. Not the imposed hope of inevitable victory, but the fragile hope of people who know they might lose, who understand the cost, who choose to fight anyway. Because that was the Emperor's final gift. Not salvation, not protection, not eternal watch. Just the chance to choose, to fail or succeed on their own merits, to be, finally and completely, free. The void is vast. The darkness is eternal. The enemies are legion. But humanity faces them now not as children hiding behind a father's strength, but as adults bearing their own burdens, making their own decisions, writing their own story. And if you listen very carefully, in the spaces between heartbeats, in the silence between prayers, you can hear the Emperor's last words echoing across the galaxy, across time, across the infinite expanse of human experience. Thank you for loving me enough to let me go. Now live, for both of us. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no war. There are only choices, and the courage to make them. Thank you for listening. May you find the strength to choose wisely.